My wife's best friend always hated me. I thought she was just looking after my wife, but the truth shook us and turned our friends against us. I met my wife, Rachel, 7 years ago during a volunteer trip. We were both part of a group traveling to help rebuild homes after a natural disaster. From the moment we locked eyes over shared laughs and paint-splattered clothes, there was an undeniable connection. Rachel had this warmth about her, a compassionate, radiant personality that drew people in. We started dating shortly after the trip, and a year later, I proposed. She said yes, and we began our life together. Rachel was my best friend, my partner in every sense of the word. But there was one person who had always been a looming presence in our relationship, her best friend, Olivia. Rachel and Olivia had been inseparable since high school. Olivia was witty, confident, and fiercely protective of Rachel. She'd been there for Rachel through heartbreaks, family issues, and everything in between. Naturally, when I came into the picture, I expected Olivia to be protective. It was clear, Rachel was her top priority. But as time went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia's protection bordered on hostility. Rachel always spoke so fondly of Olivia. She credited her with helping her through difficult times, like when Rachel's parents divorced during college. Olivia had been her rock, her confidant. Because of that bond, I made a conscious effort to get along with her. I wanted Olivia to like me, not just for Rachel's sake, but because I knew how much she valued Olivia's opinion. But Olivia never made it easy. From the start, she was overly critical of me in subtle ways. She questioned how serious I was about Rachel when we first started dating, implying I wasn't mature enough for someone like her. After we got engaged, she warned Rachel about rushing into things. And even after the wedding, she remained a constant, overbearing figure in Rachel's life, and by extension, mine. Looking back, there were so many red flags. Olivia never made it easy for me to feel like I belonged in Rachel's life. She always found subtle, and not so subtle, ways to remind me that I wasn't good enough for her. There were 3 incidents that really stuck with me though. The first was during the early days of dating Rachel. I had planned this romantic dinner for her birthday. Candles, wine, the whole deal. I told Rachel about it in advance, but somehow Olivia didn't get the memo and decided to crash the evening with a surprise bottle of champagne. Rachel didn't seem bothered, so I played along, but it felt so off. Who just shows up uninvited to their best friend's date night? Then there was the time we announced our engagement. Olivia practically hijacked the moment. Instead of celebrating, she turned it into a "Are you sure about this, Rachel?" interrogation. She said she was just being protective, but it felt like she was accusing me of being some kind of con artist. I tried to brush it off as her being overdramatic, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. The worst, though, was at our wedding rehearsal dinner. Olivia gave this toast that started out sweet, but quickly turned into a weird trip down memory lane about how no one could ever replace her in Rachel's life. It wasn't subtle at all. She made it sound like I was just some temporary guest in their dynamic duo. Even Rachel seemed uncomfortable, but she never called Olivia out on it. I've tried to tell Rachel how much this all bothered me, but she always shrugged it off. That's just how Olivia is. She'd say, she doesn't mean any harm. I wanted to believe her, but it felt like Olivia was always waiting for me to mess up, like she was silently rooting for me to fail. Fast forward to tonight. Rachel and I were hosting a dinner with some friends, including Olivia. I'd been dreading it all day, and it turns out I was right to worry. Olivia was in rare form, making digs at me in front of everyone. Stuff about how I stole Rachel away from her, and how Rachel used to be so much happier before I came along. It was humiliating, but Rachel didn't say a word to stop her. She just sat there, looking torn, like she didn't want to upset anyone. I couldn't take it anymore. As soon as dinner was over, I walked out of the room. I didn't even have a plan. I just needed to get away from Olivia before I completely lost it. Rachel followed me into the bedroom a few minutes later. She tried to defend Olivia's behavior again, saying she was just drunk or stressed, but I wasn't having it. I told her flat out that Olivia had been trying to sabotage our relationship from the start, and that I couldn't take it anymore. We were in the middle of a heated argument when Olivia barged in. And that's when everything took a turn I didn't see coming. Apparently, Olivia had been eavesdropping on us. She started ranting about how she'd been protecting Rachel from guys like me and how I didn't deserve her. At first, I thought it was just more of her usual nonsense, but then she started breaking down. She admitted she'd been in love with Rachel for years and couldn't stand to see her with someone else. I was stunned. All the little comments, the passive-aggressive behavior, the meddling, it all made sense now. Olivia wasn't just protective, she was jealous. Rachel was just as shocked as I was. She tried to comfort Olivia, but Olivia spiraled further, crying about how she'd always been the one to pick Rachel up when others let her down, how she thought Rachel would eventually realize they were meant to be together. It was honestly heartbreaking to watch. Eventually, Olivia just broke. She was sobbing so hard she could barely talk. Before we knew it, she passed out right there on the floor. Rachel and I just stood there, staring at each other, not knowing what to say. Now Olivia's asleep in our guest room, and Rachel and I are sitting here trying to figure out what to do next. Rachel feels terrible, like she's somehow responsible for Olivia's feelings. I don't blame her, but at the same time, I can't help but feel angry. This whole situation is so far beyond anything I ever expected when I married Rachel. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but one thing's for sure, things are never going to be the same. As Rachel and I sat in the dim light of the living room, the weight of the night pressed down on us. She was wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the floor, while I tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. Anger, confusion, sympathy, and even a sense of betrayal collided, leaving me drained and unsettled. Rachel's expression was distant, as if she were trying to piece together fragments of a puzzle she hadn't realized existed. She looked so shaken, and I could tell guilt was already creeping in. It was as though she was blaming herself for something she couldn't possibly have controlled. I tried to steady my own thoughts. Everything Olivia had done over the years, the passive-aggressive remarks, the intrusive behavior, the meddling in our relationship, suddenly made a twisted sort of sense. Her hostility wasn't rooted in overprotectiveness. It was jealousy. Every lingering glance, every attempt to insert herself into our lives, all of it had been driven by feelings I had never even considered. A muffled sound from the guest room jolted us both. It was Olivia, her voice weak and barely audible. I watched as Rachel instinctively stood and walked toward the door, her movements cautious, almost reluctant. I followed a few steps behind, unsure of what to expect. When we entered, Olivia was sitting up on the bed, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked so different from the confident, cutting person I had come to know, a stark contrast to the version of her I'd built up in my head. She seemed so fragile, her emotions lay bare in a way I'd never seen before. She began to speak, her words tumbling out in fragments of regret and heartbreak. She confessed that she had been carrying these feelings for Rachel for years, that her protectiveness had always been a mask for something deeper. She admitted that she had clung to the hope that one day Rachel would see her in a different light. But my presence in Rachel's life had shattered that illusion. Listening to her, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy, though it was tangled with frustration. Olivia's pain was palpable, but so were the consequences of her actions. She had allowed her unspoken feelings to poison so many moments in our lives, and now here we were, dealing with the fallout. Rachel sat beside her, visibly shaken by the revelation. Her compassion was evident. She had always been the type to shoulder the emotions of those around her, even when it wasn't fair. But I could also see the weight of Olivia's words settling heavily on her. This wasn't something she could fix, no matter how much she might want to. After some time, Olivia came to the conclusion that she couldn't stay. She decided to leave, saying she needed time and space to process everything. Rachel didn't try to stop her, though I could see how torn she was. For Rachel, Olivia had always been a constant, a best friend who had stood by her through life's toughest moments. But now, that foundation was cracked, and neither of us knew if it could ever truly be repaired. When Olivia left, the house felt eerily quiet. The tension, however, lingered like an invisible presence, heavy and oppressive. Rachel and I sat together in silence for a long time, both of us lost in thought. Eventually, we began to talk. Rachel expressed her guilt, questioning whether she had missed signs or inadvertently led Olivia on. I reassured her that none of this was her fault, but deep down, I felt the unease of knowing how deeply intertwined their lives had been. Olivia had always been a part of Rachel's world, and now that world felt unstable in a way I hadn't anticipated. That night, as I lay awake beside Rachel, I couldn't shake the lingering doubts. This wasn't just about Olivia's feelings. It was about the cracks those feelings had exposed. Trust and boundaries felt fragile in the face of everything that had unfolded. The foundation of our marriage had been shaken, and while I wanted to believe we could rebuild it stronger, the uncertainty of what lay ahead loomed over us. Rachel and I had weathered storms before, but this was different. This wasn't just about us. It was about the shadows that others had cast on our lives. What tomorrow would bring, I couldn't say. But I knew one thing for certain: things would never be the same. The fallout from that night didn't stay confined to our home for long. Somehow, what had transpired, our argument, Olivia's breakdown, became the talk of our social circle. At first, it was subtle. Strange glances from friends, vague comments that felt loaded with meaning, and an uncomfortable silence that stretched during group conversations. It wasn't until Rachel came home one evening, visibly upset, that I learned the full extent of it. Someone at the party, one of Rachel's friends, Lena, had overheard parts of our argument and started spreading rumors. According to Lena, Olivia had confessed her love for Rachel because I had pushed her to the edge. The story twisted me into the villain, painting a picture of a controlling husband who had forced Olivia into a breakdown. The whispers spread like wildfire. Friends we had known for years started distancing themselves. Invitations to gatherings stopped coming. A few brave enough to confront us outright hinted that they believed Olivia had been driven away from Rachel by me. It didn't matter what we said to defend ourselves. No one wanted to hear our side of the story. Rachel was devastated. Olivia had always been the centerpiece of her connection to this group, and without her active presence, the dynamic shifted in ways we hadn't expected. I could tell Rachel felt like she was losing not just her best friend, but an entire part of her life. I was angry at Lena, at the so-called friends who were so quick to judge us, and, deep down, at Olivia. Even though she hadn't started the rumors, her dramatic exit from our lives had left the door open for this chaos to unfold. Weeks passed and the isolation began to weigh heavily on us. Rachel and I became closer in some ways, united by the shared experience of being ostracized, but the stress was undeniable. We spent countless nights trying to figure out what to do, whether to confront Lena, to try and salvage our friendships, or simply let it all go. And then, out of nowhere, Olivia reached out. She texted Rachel, asking to meet, and though I was hesitant, Rachel felt like it was something she had to do. When Rachel came back from their meeting, she told me Olivia had apologized for everything, for the years of meddling, for the hurt she'd caused, and, most surprisingly, for letting things spiral after that night. She said Olivia had decided to set the record straight with the group. True to her word, Olivia called a gathering of mutual friends, including Lena. We weren't invited, which stung, but I understood why. Olivia needed to handle this on her terms. From what I heard later, Olivia didn't hold back. She admitted to her feelings for Rachel, but made it clear that I had never mistreated her or pushed her away. She took full responsibility for her behavior that night and called out the group for spreading unfounded rumors. She even singled out Lena, accusing her of stirring the pot and turning a deeply personal matter into social gossip. The aftermath was messy. While some friends apologized to us, it was clear the damage wasn't something that could be easily undone. The group dynamic shifted again, with Lena becoming something of a pariah. She tried to defend herself, but Olivia's public stance left little room for doubt. Rachel and I didn't magically regain all the friendships we'd lost, but we found peace in the quiet that followed. Olivia's intervention gave us closure, even if it came at a cost to her. Over time, Olivia and I began to find common ground. While we'd never be close, there was a mutual respect that hadn't been there before. We acknowledged the pain of the past, but agreed to move forward for Rachel's sake. Rachel and Olivia, however, weren't the same. Their bond, once unshakable, now felt fragile, weighed down by the events that had unfolded. They still spoke occasionally, but it was clear their friendship would never fully return to what it had been. For me, the resolution came not just from Olivia's defense, but from the understanding that sometimes relationships have to change to grow. I thanked her for what she did, acknowledging the courage it took to stand up for us, even if it meant exposing her vulnerabilities to others. In the end, peace settled over our lives, albeit imperfectly. Some friendships were lost, others forever changed, but Rachel and I were stronger for it. And as for Olivia, while her place in our lives would never be what it once was, I found myself quietly grateful for her willingness to do the right thing, even when it was hard. As for Lena, she faded from the group, her own web of lies finally catching up to her. I couldn't bring myself to feel bad for her. After everything we'd been through, she had become just another part of a chapter one was ready to leave behind. Life went on, quieter but more focused. And in that stillness, Rachel and I found the space to rebuild, not just our relationships with others, but with each other.